Hello and welcome to episode 15 of the Gold Goats and Guns podcast. My name is Tom Luongo. It is Tuesday, June 13th, 2017. And we're going to talk about Hungary today, of all places, and a bunch of other things as well. So let's get right to it, because Hungary is in the news, and Hungary is a very important part of the story that's unfolding in the EU. And we talked about the British elections last week, and over the weekend, the Italians held some regional elections in which the secessionist five-star movement did very poorly, or at least didn't do nearly as well as was expected, and then we had the French parliamentary elections with record levels of abstention, in which boy toy Emmanuel Macron secured a sincere majority in Parliament. And on the basis of all three of those things, what a shock that 48 hours later the EU takes Hungary, Poland, and the Czech Republic effectively to court over their unwillingness to abide by Angela Merkel's refugee quotas. And that is, well, it's not surprising in any way, manner, shape, or form, to be honest. And it prompted, and knowing that this was coming, and then prompted in return, at the same time, I literally looked at two headlines this morning on RT that had that at top, and then the thing right below that was Hungary passes a bill severely restricting the operations of NGOs, non-governmental organizations, in Hungary, as in order for foreign countries, foreign operations, foreign NGOs to operate, they have to disclose publicly like any contributions above like $2,000 or something, like something ridiculously low, and that comes directly from Prime Minister Viktor Orban, who has stood staunchly against against Merkel's refugee policy, and going so far as to build a border wall along their southern border, which is manned by razor wire, machine guns, and everything else. And the Poles, effectively, have done the same thing. Well, they haven't built a wall yet, but they're refusing to take any more refugees, as is the Czech Republic. All three of these countries are incredibly important in Eastern Europe. And so what you have now is, and they're all just, this is a fight now between Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, who's an absolute patriot, cut from the same cloth as Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. He's absolutely a nationalist, and he's standing athwart globalist billionaire bastard George Soros. As a matter of fact, Orban came out very recently and just laid it on the line and said, this is all what's happening inside the country now, and why we need this bill, and why we need to start this process, is that George Soros does not respect any limitations. He's a billionaire who's willing to spend as much money as he has to, does not respect the rules of God or anybody else, God or country or the law, to get exactly what he wants. And that's who that man is. And that's probably the best description. It's not an exact quote, but it's Orban's quote I saw in an article about this. I think it was on Fox News or whatever. It doesn't really matter. It's just some random link that's all really coming from the same AP source. It was probably the best description I've seen of Soros in a long time, because it's exactly how Soros has described himself. And that he has a bit of a God complex. Well, I wouldn't say a bit of a God complex. The man actually does have a God complex. And he's ethnic Hungarian. And so this fight between these two massive figures is going to go to the wire. And now Orban has Putin's support. Putin was in Budapest in March, and I'm sure all this was discussed, as were the next steps, because, trust me, Putin is about 12 steps ahead of George Soros. Otherwise, Putin would not still be in power, because Soros has been trying to get rid of Putin for 17 years. So, in my mind, this is the first thing that Hungary is going to do to defend itself against what just happened to Macedonia. And don't kid yourself in thinking that the Poles and the Russophobic Law and Justice Party that's currently in power, and from what I understand, if not a wholly owned subsidiary of the CIA, owes its position to, again, to a lot of outside money and outside influence, mostly U.S. backed. So if you think that that's going to continue in Hungary, it's not. As a matter of fact, I expect Hungary to be the country that actually stands up against, that actually is the first one to truly stand up against Brussels and say, look, I don't care what you do to me in the court, what you do to us in court. We are not taking these people in, period. You will have to invade us with whatever army you think you have. And it's not going to come, and Donald Trump, who owns the purse strings to NATO and owns the control of everything in NATO, is not going to invade Hungary in order to enact Angela Merkel's refugee quotas. It's just not going to happen. So I don't know what the EU is thinking here, other than they're continuing to try and double down on their democratic mandate, the German democratic mandate, versus everybody else's, and thinks that that's the way this is going to be played. They don't understand that this is getting to be well beyond politics now. But that's all these people understand. Okay? And when you start to really look at the way these things are laying themselves out, all of these issues, all of these countries are far beyond politics. This is about survival. This is about existential threats. Qatar is looking for whatever friends it can muster in its fight against the Saudis in order to stave off an invasion and a threat to their very own existence. And the Saudis are in the same position. They're running a massive primary budget deficit. They're hemorrhaging money left and right. They're if they don't if they don't try and bully the rest of the Gulf Cooperation Council countries into submission, if they don't get Qatar to submit here, they're going to lose the respect of the rest of the Arab world, and the whole GCC is going to implode. It's an existential threat to the Saudis' political power on the entire Arabian Peninsula and then within its own borders. These are the ramifications here. This is why Turkey pushed back and Erdogan moved troops into their base in Qatar. Okay? This is why Iran is stepping up during Ramadan to bring food in to Qatar in order to gain cachet and gain support from within the broader Muslim community, putting Shiite-Sunni divide on the back burner, putting that aside in order to do the right thing during their holy month, while the Saudis are the ones stepping in it, left and right. This is what's going on. Everybody is fighting for their existential life at this point, including the U.S. deep state, okay, including the British deep state. The EU technocrats are trying to fight back with whatever they have, which they don't have much. It's not like they have a military, like I said. All they have is these bullshit legal agreements, pardon my French. All they have are these supranational treaties and agreements that can be undone in a moment's notice by just saying, look, I find you in breach of contract. You know, they pulled so many of these people these countries pulled out of the Schengen agreement. Even though it's there, it's in place. How are you going to enforce it in international courts? You're going to enforce it by international law when this is what happens when you think that because you have quote unquote made something legal, to quote Emperor Palpatine or to quote Senator Palpatine, I will make it legal. When you think that by making something legal you make it real, and then you find out that no, it doesn't work that way. When a whole bunch of people tell you to go piss off, go ahead, sue me. And then you walk away. And you go do what you're going to do. This is the history of the world, ultimately, when it reaches crisis points. And we're reaching these crisis points in dramatic fashion all around the world. Look for the Poles, the Czechs, and the Hungarians to all stand up to Brussels on this. None of them use the euro, so none of them can be twisted that way. The United States is not going to turn the SWIFT system against these countries in order to enforce Angela Merkel's refugee problem. It's not going to happen. Okay? The only time we've cut people out of the SWIFT system was Iran over their nuclear weapons program. We threatened the Swiss with that once, and the Swiss caved. So that's not going to happen. They can't go. What is Soros going to do? He's going to just trash the Hungarian forint? He's going to trash the Polish zloty? They'll try. He's absolutely going to try, because that's all he's got left. It's that and his NGOs, and his NGO Open Society Foundation model is breaking down, and the EU is now attempting to eat its own, and the whole thing is, and the markets at this point are like are happy that the EU is doing this, because this is good for the euro, because Brussels is showing solidarity, showing strength. Like, are you kidding me? This is the Tarkin moment. The more you tighten your grip, Tarkin, the more star systems, or countries in this case, will slip through your fingers. The more they push, the more they press, the worse the fallout's going to be. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. And look at the face of that man that you're looking at right now and tell me that he's impressed with Angela Merkel. He's not. Not when he's got Vladimir Putin on his side. Not when he's got Donald Trump on his side. Which is why, by the way, they're trying so desperately to impeach Trump. Because they got to get rid of him. They think they neutered Brexit earlier in the week. They didn't. They're going to press that as hard as they can, or last week, as hard as they can. And they think they've got Trump by the short and curlies. And I'm telling you, I don't think they do. But it's not going to be about, as Martin Armstrong points out, it's not going to be about law. It's not going to be about the rule of law here. It's going to be about what they can get away with. And anybody who's not prepared to see Trump go down in a flurry of smoke and vapor, but simply because that's what the moneyed interests in Wall Street, Washington, and New York, want, then guess what? That's what's going to happen if he doesn't watch himself. And that's when Putin has to stand up on the world stage and put an end to this. Which brings me to Ethereum. I've talked about Bitcoin in the last couple of podcasts. I've talked about cryptocurrencies. I've told you that I think it's time that you get exposure to these things. I'm going to try and do a video explaining how to get yourself set up on a network called Steam, which I've been a part of now for nearly a month, and I find to be possibly one of the most fascinating new things that's going to come down the pike in terms of how we communicate with each other and how we pay each other for the next century. But Ethereum is incredibly important. If you've been following the headlines at all, you'll see that Ethereum like doubled in price in the last 2 weeks. It touched $400. I'm going to show you a chart in a couple of minutes. But what's important here is to understand that on Sunday, I saw a headline, an article, which said that the Monetary Authority of Singapore, otherwise known as the Singapore Central Bank, and a real, true, honest-to-God oxymoron in the 21st century, because it's actually a well-run central bank. The Monetary Authority of Singapore is actually the only central bank in the world I grudgingly respect. But that said, the MAS announced that they're now going to tokenize the Singapore dollar through the Ethereum blockchain in order to clear all of their in order to streamline all of their financial services and all of their transaction clearing and all of their monitoring. Everything is going to happen now through the Ethereum blockchain. Singapore just put the Singapore dollar on the Ethereum blockchain, or at least it's planning on doing so in the next couple of months. And they published the white paper. They told everybody how they're going to do it, and they just put a huge exclamation point on the statement that they want to be the yuan clearing center for Asia. They want to be Zurich of Southeast Asia. It's always been in their grasp, but Hong Kong is their natural competitor. Moving to Ethereum to clear trades is an enormous bit of news. It eventually takes them out of the SWIFT system. The SWIFT system is under attack. The main tool of the main backbone of the U.S.'s ability to wage hybrid war against countries around the world is to cutting them off, threatening to cut them off from SWIFT. Russia now has its own private system. The Chinese have their own private system. Singapore is moving to the Ethereum blockchain. Putin just sat down with the designer of Ethereum at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum last week to discuss building a kind of crypto ruble and to professionalize all of their financial services through effectively the automation of 90% of the back office stuff that goes on in banks today can be automated. And the biggest impediment, I have an article out on Halsey News this morning about Bitcoin and Ethereum and touching on this stuff, so check that out. That what's important to understand here is that the biggest impediment to emerging markets growing up is their access to professional financial people. No, people who actually know how to run a bank. I remember when I was studying, when I was working with a guy in Vietnam, and we were studying, investment opportunities all across Southeast Asia, because that's where our focus was. I remember coming across a number of articles about Indonesia. This was 5 years ago, where Indonesia was Indonesia's banking system was growing like a weed. Its economy was growing at 8 to 9% because the Obama administration was putting tons of money into Indonesia because, well, Obama's from Indonesia, and that's usually what happens with presidents, right? And I read numerous articles explaining, talking about how much Indonesian banks were willing to pay people from the quote-unquote first world, from the U.S. and Europe and whatnot, to come and actually run their banks because they didn't have any mid-level managers. They didn't have anybody who could run a back office properly. So the growth of the financial markets was far outstripping the quality of the labor pool. And it happens all over Southeast Asia, which is why these countries go through such ugly boom-bust cycles and why they're so easily manipulated by the first world through the forex markets. Because they don't understand that. China has not gone through this because China and the People's Bank of China, the PBOC, very smartly sends all of their top people to go trade in bond pits here in the United States before they're ever allowed to start designing policy. It's just why the Chinese, for all of their faults, have been able to survive multiple attacks over the last 10 years on their financial system. And they've made a mess of other things. Don't get me wrong. This is the consequence. They've got other issues. But from that perspective, the Chinese have been very successful. And so Russia has the same problem. I mean, they don't have a particularly professional banking system. And one could argue that George Soros is part of that problem, as well as Goldman Sachs and even much of the staff of the Bank of Russia. They were all you could make the argument that they're all fifth columnists working for the United States. And I've made that point abundantly clear to my former subscribers over at Resolute Wealth for the last 2 years. And so Putin making a move like this and charging the Bank of Russia to explore ways that they could use Ethereum to cut down on corruption, to cut down corruption throughout the entirety of the government, and to professionalize the banking system, because that is a goal of the Bank of Russia for the next 5 years. They just published their quote unquote 5-year plan on this. Very important, incredibly important. I can go on about this for another hour if you. Honestly, this is earth-shattering news that's happening at the same time as all these other geopolitical events are happening. All right, let's get to the charts and I'll get you out of here, and then we'll pick this conversation up on, I don't know, what's today? Tuesday, maybe Friday. If not Friday, then Saturday. All right, let's do this. All right, so gold. Let's talk about gold, because we always do, because gold's still very important. And while Ethereum and Bitcoin are getting a lot of the current safe haven flows, gold is still an incredibly important safe haven asset. So right now, gold's trading at around 1265 or so as I pushed record this afternoon, and you want to watch this 1261 level. This would be a close below. This would be a 2-bar reversal on the weekly chart, and would tell us that we're going to see a deeper correction back down into 1250 or even 1230 or 1225. What we don't want to see in any correction is a break below this low here at around 16 or so. Okay, that's very important. But gold is setting up for a further correction, and it's just the way things are. And that read is reinforced when we look at silver, because we are trading with silver in 2-bar reversal territory. So silver needs to get back above $17 by the end of the week, or it's in trouble. Okay, so if not, then we're looking at a potential washout in silver back to 1606. If that's the case, and both of those support levels break down over the course of the next couple of weeks, right? 1216 on gold, 1606 on silver. That's speaking to a much deeper correction and a possible dollar liquidity or euro liquidity crisis brewing as people start looking for dollars. All right. And then let's talk about Ethereum. So Ethereum's been on a tail. I'm going to show you that I don't normally do this. Anybody who's been following me for years knows that I don't like to even look at daily charts. I usually look at the weekly and monthlies, but 5-hour charts, because in order to get any kind of resolution of what's actually happening, because these markets are moving so fast, I've actually got to look at the 5-hour chart here from investing.com, who just put Ethereum up on their Forex page today or yesterday. And we're looking at today over the course of the next couple of hours. If Ethereum closes above 390, 391, it's going to continue to move higher. If not, we could start to see a drop off. So, but looks like a spike bottom here on high volume, and we'll see. But this is you can see the violence of this chart. That we were, at the end of May, we were trading at 200, and now we're trading at 400. And the possibility of trading at 800 or 1,000 by the end of the summer is not untoward, given the way the chart looks and given what's happening. All right. And then the last thing. Again, like we saw in gold and silver, Bitcoin is beginning to get toppy. We want to watch 2480 or so on the low end, because it all depends on what exchange you're talking about here. Because Bitcoin, so just 2480 or so is probably a good bet, or 2475. Anything below that on a daily closing basis or on a weekly closing basis would be bad. This is an engulfing bar for the week. We broke last week's high. We barely but did break last week's low. So this could be a potential reversal bar that would take us back to, say, 2,000 before going higher again. All right. So that's what we've got going on in Bitcoin and Ethereum, gold and silver. Those are the 4 most important markets right now, along with the euro, which looks like it's getting toppy at around $1.13, $1.12. But we'll see what happens. It's going to need to break down below $1.11 to confirm any kind of downtrend and reassertion of a dollar bull market. We got the FOMC meeting tomorrow. I fully expect the Fed to raise rates. If they don't, these markets are going to go ballistic, because everybody right now is expecting a rate hike from the Fed. I expect a rate hike from the Fed, and I don't even think the Fed should be hiking rates. All right, so the Fed's got what they want. They've got a weak dollar, and stock market's at an all-time high. That's all the cover they need to raise rates. Ignore all the financial or all the economic indicators are all noise at this point. That's what the Fed's watching. That's what the Fed cares about. Everything else is just, it's just a chase scene. All right. So you guys take care. We'll talk to you soon.